Hey, welcome to another episode of All Our Yesterdays. We got a great show again, as always. And as always, we have Kevin, who's our
What's going on,
producer, running
everybody?
all the buttons and making sure that everything goes smoothly. And we got Robert along again as guest co host. And our guest today is none other than Jerry Rees, who is famous for a bunch of stuff, one of those
Howdy.
being the movie Tron. But he has done so many things, and we're going to try to get into as much of that stuff as we can. So, Jerry, I read your little 4-page thing, and I'll start out with saying that you started out in high school. Like, that's how
Right.
long you've been doing this. And so your mentor was Eric Larson at Disney. And tell us a little bit about him and who he was and what he did.
Right. Well, Eric was one of the veteran Disney animators that they called the Nine Old Men, sort of a take on the Supreme Court. Walt depended on that team all the way from the Snow White days up until they were just retiring about the time Fox and the Hound came along. In fact, they did a couple of scenes for Fox and the Hound. But Eric Larson, in particular, as one of those Nine Old Men, took the responsibility to train new people coming in. And I was toiling away. I was writing little fan letters. I don't know if you remember at the time, but the Gulf Oil Company put out a Disney magazine, and you could get them at gas stations. So it would have Disney art and an update of what was happening at the studio and everything. And I was sending drawings to that magazine. And they were sending me notes back. It's like, sorry, we're just a publication. We don't have a direct connection with Disney. I was trying to find a way to knock on the door, and it's a longer story, but I'll give the cliff notes of it. Some guy whose office I had sort of snuck into to try to punch animation paper caught me. And at first he scolded me. And when he caught me there the second time, he asked me, okay, what are you up to? I showed him my home animation that I was doing on a little Super 8 projector. And he, instead of being the scolding guy, turned into the guy who handed me the most important phone number in my life. He said, I've heard that Disney has a bunch of their veterans about to retire. They're starting to think about training new people. So here's a phone number. It's Ed Hansen. He's the production manager for the Disney Feature Animation Department, in case you're interested. Wow. I was in my teens. I was junior year in high school. So I called, and Ed Hansen picked up, and I said I was this kid who was interested in becoming a Disney feature animator. So he goes, well, have your dad drive you down, and we'll take a look at your stuff. So I did. I went down, and my dad drove me in our Buick Special station wagon, and he waited in Ed's little lobby while they looked at my stuff. And they introduced me to Eric and said that, he's going to be your tutor. And so Eric told me, well, anytime you have a break from high school, this will be your desk. And he showed me a desk. And at around that time, just at a similar time, I noticed in a back room near Eric, there were people like Ron Clemens, I think, was in there trying out, and Tad Stones, and I don't know if Glenn Keane had come in yet or not. I don't think so. I don't think he was quite there. But anyway, so I as a junior in high school, had this desk that was just waiting for me at Disney anytime I had a break. And it's funny, years later, my mom and dad both told me, and my mom had actually kept kind of a ledger of this. She said, the studio kept calling to say, when is Jerry available? Does he have a break from high school yet? And when is spring break, etc. So they were sort of getting in touch with my parents, trying to make sure that I didn't forget. And of course I wouldn't.
Yeah, how would you forget that?
Yeah. Yeah.
So he was amazing. Eric was so patient. And later he became a mentor of so many people. But I caught him in those early days when, I was there was no CalArts character animation program yet. This was before that happened. So I went through, completed my junior year and then my senior year in high school. And Disney notified me on one of my visits. They said, you're just about to graduate from high school. Next year, we're going to start this thing at CalArts called the CalArts Character Animation Program. And how would you like to be teacher's assistant and help the teacher set up for the first year during the summer between? And so I said, well, that'd be amazing. But I looked at their prices and I said, oh my God, my family couldn't come nowhere close to affording this. And they said, well, we'll give you a scholarship.
Wow.
So I just said, well, yeah, count me in. So I spent, as soon as I graduated high school, I moved down there into a friend's house in Burbank. They just let me stay in an extra room. And I practically lived in the studio and just prepped everything for that first year of Cal Arts. And then went out and became in the, TA for the guinea pig year. And so after that first year it was me and Brad Bird and John Lasseter and John Musker and Harry Sabin and Doug Leffler and a whole bunch of really, I think there were only 12 of us, but we were the guinea pigs. And then they approved and went, okay, this should continue after the first year. And then after the second year, they drafted 4 of us. So Brad Bird, John Musker, Doug Leffler, and I became college dropouts after our second year because Disney
good enough reason.
It made me feel a little dubious about how I would recommend what our kids do, because Dad was a college dropout and look how good it was for him.
He was a college dropout because of this.
So the reason was highly important. And about that same time, from another class, not from the character animation class, I think it was the experimental animation class at Cal Arts, they pulled Henry Selick in at that same year. So he was the fifth guy.
Wow.
As you're talking, it sounds like you were being invited into the Wonka chocolate factory.
It was amazing. And after years of just being mystified, even though I lived in Southern California, to me, even the idea of Burbank was like the other side of the moon. I had no idea how to get to any of that. That to me Burbank was the big city, as far as I was concerned. So that to go from just like wandering in the dark to suddenly having them go, come on in, here's the red carpet. It was just amazing. So, I never took it for granted, and it was absolutely a dream come true. And I worked really hard, and Eric taught all of us really important stuff. And did I misunderstood how you did Disney animation totally when I was going in. I loved it. I ate it up. I watched all of it, but I thought an animator would sit and do the finished art all the time. I didn't know there was such a thing as a rough or in-betweens or any of that stuff. So I had practiced drawing the most clean art. And Eric, one of the first things he asked was, well, where are your roughs? And it was like, roughs? What? So he took like a big fat 6B lead pencil and was drawing like these big expressive things. And he said, you don't want to fall in love with a drawing, because you're if you fall in love with a drawing, you're going to do a crappy scene. It's like, he didn't even use the word crappy because he was so polite. He said, he said, you have to think of all different kind of ways that your character is expressing what it's feeling through pantomime. So you have to try a bunch of stuff before you even think about drawing a pretty eyelash or anything like that. So he said, stop doing that. And so he would show me, and he would flip through the pages and show like dynamic pose changes and stuff. And I realized, oh my God, there's so much I'm not exploring yet with just performance before I get into doing a nice drawing. So that was a critical thing that he conveyed.
Yeah.
But it was funny. It took me a while to learn that. That was not an intuitive thing. I was so used to being careful that I have to admit that when I brought him the first drawings after that lecture, I had still drawn them the pretty way, and then I had gone in with blue pencil and drawn a fake rough.
That is like fake showing your math homework.
So, but that was a huge breakthrough. And his whole thing was the magic here. He let all of us know, like, I know that you're mesmerized with having a stack of drawings that seem to move, because when you show them in quick sequence, they seem to be able to move. Well, nobody else cares about that. It's like, trust me, to you, it's magic. To the audience, they don't care that it's moving. What they care about is what's the character feeling and expressing, and how does it move them right now? So, the performance underneath, but the illusion of life, not the illusion of movement, is the key. So boy, did he push all of us to like, stop being mesmerized by the fact that you can make stuff move around. How is it going to move the audience? So,
but that being said, though, Disney animation was always top notch, and it always felt like I would pay attention to how well everything moved, because it was so much different than everything else.
Yes, but I think part of that, underneath of it, a big part of it was they wanted you to believe that it was a living thing,
Hmm.
and forget that it was a drawing.
Yeah.
So
Didn't some of the earlier ones, didn't they actually like film actual like the actions and then animate over it kind of deal? Like for some of the earlier stuff?
not for the earlier stuff. For the earlier stuff, they completely went just with caricature, like Snow White.
Mhm.
Now, granted, Snow White herself
Yeah.
had some film reference, but they wouldn't just faithfully rotoscope trace it. They used it as a foundation. But like the dwarves and all the, the most expressive stuff. And, I remember Ward Kimball and some of the others talking about the magic moment in Snow White. That was such a critical point in the history of animation and the history of Disney Studios. Was they had bet everything on this giant, expensive feature. And what Walt and his team believed is, we think we can, nobody's done a full feature and put it in a theater for adults to watch and all that stuff. That's just a new thing. We're the comedic sidekick entertainment shorts before the serious big feature, but we're going to be the big feature now. And we believe we can make people care about the characters and really get caught up in the emotions like any live action movie. And they didn't trace live action to do that. If you watch the difference between all those dwarves and they, each one, Happy and Dopey and Doc, they just really made sure that each one had its own personality and expressed it with different pantomime, different gesture sets. And they didn't do that they definitely looked at actors and studied, and it's sort of like any actor going to school, they study, but they didn't achieve that by tracing anything.
Yeah.
And there was that moment where they screened it, and Walt and some of the other guys were peeking through the curtain, and those little dwarves that were not traced from any live actor, they were fully animated. They go up to the coffin where she's laying out, and they kneel down, and they have tears coming down their face. And the audience started crying at it. Frank and Ollie and different people were talking about an audience full of adults in this cinema weeping with a cartoon. And they went, "We've done it. We've achieved it." And something in a lecture I gave recently that I pointed out was, they didn't win by having better technology at all. They had the same downshooter cameras, stacks of drawings that would seem to have movement. Everybody did that. And it wasn't that they tried to move it smoother. It's because they thought about acting and emotion as they did the motion. So emotion drove the motion. Whereas other people were like, I'm going from point A to point B, or doing this pose to that pose. But they were getting to the nuance of, how is this individual character expressing what it's feeling right now? What is its little tick of movement when it's nervous? What's its standard body language for that one person, etc. And by the time they put that in front of you and you experienced it, you stopped thinking about the drawings, and you went, well, Dopey is feeling this way right now, and I care about him. And then afterwards you go, oh yeah, it's stacks of drawings. I forgot. I just cared about him in that moment. So but I think a lot of people mistakenly thought that the quote unquote smooth movement was the secret. Not at all. The smooth movement was at times, and other times very erratic movement, was an outcropping of trying to make acting drive everything. So emotion, range of emotion rather than range of motion. So
I think you're spotlighted. Everything wrong with a lot of our current special effects driven movies is exactly what you said. We're kind of missing their characterization. And as you were talking, I was like, I know you worked on Fox and the Hound, and I don't look back at Fox and the Hound and I'm like, oh, what fantastic animation. You just remember the emotion of the characters more than anything. And that's, like you said, the whole point of the film.
I don't know. I tend to, I'm a huge fan of animation in general. Like, even style changes, like you look at some old Tom and Jerry, like the earlier Tom and Jerry stuff, then you go to like the weird 70s weird jazzy Tom and Jerry, and it's completely different style, but it's still it's got its place. I'm a fan of good animation in general, even to the point where with voice actors and stuff, I'll watch something just because a particular voice actor's in it. It's like,
but I must admit, always things that have heart and character that come through, like the Charlie Brown Christmas special. Sit there and watch, the little speech on stage about the meaning of Christmas, and my heart melts. I just like, I don't care that it's not full animation. It's like magical.
Yeah. And it's a place for all of it. And it's, with the exception of some of the newer stuff, I think is dumbed down a little too much. Not necessarily with Disney. I'm saying like, you know, there's things all over the place like the Cartoon Network and whatever. But there's still some great stuff out there. And you know, they've gone over and they've made the switch with all the Pixar stuff where you're still like, I can't even think of a Pixar movie that I've watched where I haven't choked up. Like they're all very, very dramatic and they're kids movies but they're not at the same time. You know?
They're not. Yeah. A film like, and you know, they've obviously in some of their style, they've tailored it so visually it looks more like a kids movie. But, you know, the veterans told us that they never worked on a kids movie. They literally said that. They said, I've never made a kids movie. I made a movie and we liked it. And sort of the kid in me as an adult connected with it, but I didn't. And a couple of them talked overtly about hating focus groups and like not trying to reach a demographic or a market thing. They said, look, the best way to know if it's working is if you while you're making it really like it. You're not like, well, demographic tests show that somebody will like it. I kind of bored today, but I'm just kind of getting it done. But research shows somebody else will probably like this. They're like, oh my God, recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
But if you go like, I haven't tested anybody, but I really care about being at work today and this matters. And oh my God, I can't wait for an audience to see this moment. It's like, if you love it, then you know somebody does. You have proof that somebody does because you do. So that's what you hang on to.
Yeah, that's huge.
Now, I've seen this thing that comes online all the time, and it says, oh, Disney reused the Jungle Book scene for this Winnie the Pooh scene or something, and it shows like the comparison of how, you know, what's the little kid's name from Jungle Book?
Yep.
Mowgli.
And
yeah, Mowgli. And then it shows, you know, Christopher Robin or whatever, and it's like this. So can you confirm or deny what that stuff is?
I was very disappointed by that, and it was and all of us were that went in. It's funny because, you know, my whole generation, that CalArts wave that came in then that first year in 1975, like we really saw something like Snow White and Pinocchio and Bambi and Dumbo, like those films as amazing cinema that for its day and still today, but especially for its day, was really like kick-ass cinema that stood up to anything else being made on the screen at the time. And so we saw stepping into the current era of Disney with that same attitude. So we were saying, well, we should all be making things that fit along with Spielberg and Lucas and Coppola. Like, we want stuff that fits in the canon of their work right alongside of it and is equally dynamic. So that was in our hearts and driving us. And in '77 we went to the premiere of Star Wars and just came out going, yes, like we have to be doing that level of shock for people, to just like Snow White shocked audiences back when it was made. It was not just, oh, another film. It was like, what? And we went, okay, Star Wars did that. We have to do that. And when we would go to the studio and see that as things were winding down and some of the guys were retiring and some of the mid-level management was trying to sort of get things done more from a production managerial standpoint, which makes sense within a business, but it certainly wasn't to generate excitement among the people making it. We were disappointed to see stuff like that happen, and where they would do reuse. And in fact, when I jumped onto Fox and the Hound, and one of the first things I did that sort of caused a stir within the ranks there was I did the style for Dinky and Boomer, the two birds, especially Dinky, the little bird. And at the time, it was unusual. And it's funny, Ted Berman, one of the directors of the film, 10 years later in an article cited my bird animation as something that shocked him. He said, look, since Snow White days, we had a way of animating a bird until this guy, Jerry Rees, came along. Now, I didn't know that was even in his article 10 years later, but an NBC producer sent it to me about 4 months ago. And he goes, by the way, 10 years after you finished that movie, one of your directors was talking about you individually and comparing you with the legacy of Disney as setting a new bar for people. So, and what I had done is I had listened to Eric Larson, who said, we appreciate that you enjoy our work, but please don't copy us. Like, you could pull at the time scenes out of They called it pulling it out of the morgue. It was the archive. And flip through the original scene of like a Pinocchio scene or something. It wasn't like copies made. It was like the original thing in cardboard and rubber bands, and brought on a cart to your room and set on your desk. And they'd go, well, so what, 3 or 4 days? And yeah. And so you could flip through and pull drawings out and study how it was done. And so they saw us appreciating and studying and everything, but said, please now don't just copy what we did in your work, because at the time we were discovering it. We were looking at real life, and we were looking at friends and strangers and trying to pull that into our work. And so you need to do the same thing, not just look at now animation and pull animation into your animation, pull life into your animation. So I had seen real birds out by the commissary and just went, damn, that little bird is doing like 4 poses every second sometimes. And then it'll hold one for 3 seconds. And it's like, we're taught never to do that. You can't do multiple poses in 1 second. It'll confuse people. But that bird's not confusing me at all. I totally get what it's doing. So we have to be able to crack this. So I went, okay, I'm going to make that my assignment. So I did things where I studied how they moved, and sometimes they would just do like hint that they were going to fly by, you would just see a slight movement of their head, and then they were just a blur streak. And then it looked like 20 wings, and then they're just gone. And it's like, that's how it would take off. And I was looking at nature footage and stuff. And so I started to put that in little hops and tail flicks and completely stretch their heads when they'd turn and do the timings that was pulled from nature. And so that caused a stir, and John Musker and Brad Bird and a number of people were like, whoa, cool, what are you doing? And the two directors were delighted by what they saw on film. And they immediately said, well, that's nice. Maybe you can reuse that and flop it and use it again for here. And I went, no, I don't have to reuse it. I'll just do another. I invented this. I'll animate you another part scene. I'll do more. I'll do 20 scenes. It's like, but they immediately were like, oh my God, if it worked once, let's retrace it and use it again and again and again. Now, people like Eric Larson weren't doing that at all. The veteran generation were coaxing us to explore and put stuff in and expand and grow. But the sort of mid-level bean counter sort of keepers of just the business going along had a different attitude of trying to cut corners and sort of not trusting the search for new things. Mm-hmm. And so, that whole problem of reuse, which I've seen those reels, and it's kind of startling to see how many are put together. They were trying to get me to do that with my own work immediately. Like, well, you did one scene well, maybe you can just keep using that. It's like, nope, I'll do more scenes from scratch. Thank you. And so Eric, actually, and this is kind of a wild thing, Eric Larson enjoyed the fact that we were being just forging ahead with Discovery as he and the other veterans coaxed us, despite the sort of mid-level people who had inherited the studio after Walt's passing and after they were getting ready to retire. That he loved the fact that we kept pushing to follow their inspiration and not give in to the just, well, let's slow down and retrace and reuse. It's like we weren't giving into that. So he liked that a lot, and he asked me to give a talk just to my peers, not to any management people. But Eric came and sat in the back, and he got a special screening room for me that in those days, now it would be easy to do on any of our computers, but in that day we had 35 millimeter film that I could hit a control and stop it and not have it burn in the projector, but put a little dowser in front of it that would keep it from overheating, and it would mute the image, but you could still see it. And I took nature footage. And so it was completely rebellious, but I told my fellow animators, with Eric sitting there looking at me from the back row, smiling, said, we have been told that this stuff is too cartoony. And by the way, this is an extra detail that will make this all make sense. The two directors, after they were delighted by seeing my animation and movement of the little bird, as soon as they flipped through the individual drawings, then hated it and said, no, you can't do that. You can't stretch a character. That's way too cartoony for Disney animation. You can't do that. And I'm like, well, this is weird. They loved it in motion, in movement. They were delighted by it. But when they look at my drawings of how I accomplished it, it's like, oop, not allowed. Can't. And they actually said it's not Disney quality. It's not Disney feature. That's cartoony shorts.
Wow.
So what we developed was a routine where I kept doing the scenes which they kept liking in movement. But when they'd say, well, check Jerry's stack of drawings, Rebecca Rees and Sue Croyer, and she was a different last name then. We weren't married yet. But I had met Rebecca we've now been married 40 years. But she came in through Art Center into Disney, I think Cal Arts into Disney. So she and Sue Croyer would take my stack of drawings. They would do the cleanup for it. And they would take all the offensive drawings of the stretches and all the stuff that made it. They'd take them out of the stack and then go get it approved and then go put them back into the stack and send it through ink and paint and camera. And the directors were none the wiser. So this guy who praised my work 10 years later didn't realize that I had to sneak stuff past him that he already liked because he was sticking his nose in and trying to hyper control every frame of how it was made. It's like, no, if you like it on film, stop looking at my drawing stack. Okay. So in my lecture, that's what I emphasized. I said, we have been told that to do this to a bird is too cartoony. I will now show you not a cartoon, but nature. This is an actual bird and a real camera. And we're going to go through it frame by frame. And I showed how extremely caricatured it was. It was wild. And I just said, I'm just barely meeting that. I'm not even caricaturing it. I'm just copying nature pretty directly. So basically, don't listen to them when they tell you. Just do it. And Eric was in the back of the room, like jingling his keys in his pocket and snickering because he so loved that he was sort of getting a sort of a rebellion to rise up in the group to just go keep exploring and inventing and drawing things in from life. Don't listen to the people that are saying, "Oh no, it's too much. You can't stop." So Eric worked counter to all of that trace and reuse stuff, and it was coaxing us to just keep exploring and bringing new stuff into the work. And then it was cool because Brad and John and a lot of the other people, the only person that didn't follow my style at all was Cliff Nordberg. He sort of had his own way to animate birds and he just ignored everything. But everybody else that got bird scenes used the style that I had uncovered for Dinky.
Nice. What did Eric think of your bird scene?
He really loved it. To him, that was evidence that I was listening to him. I was drawing things in from real life. And that's why he gave me the lecture specifically about, I did what Eric said. I studied real life, brought it into animation. People are delighted by this as kind of a change of pace, a new thing they haven't seen before. And so I invite all the rest of you to continue to do that. So the reason he had me give the lecture is because he had seen it, liked it, and thought it was a good evidence of somebody paying attention to the professor. So
nice. That's awesome. The mentor, says the student, is going to continue on the legacy, and I have trained him well, or whatever. Right. To have that, I can't think of the word I'm looking for, but to have that,
Well, to have a professor sort of validate that
there you go. The
growth is worth sharing is nice.
Yeah, it's a big thing, when you're especially in a situation like Disney, like where it's Disney, like it's not like it's just some small animation company just coming from the start. This is like a iconic company. Yeah. And by the way, you mentioned before that you made like an animation when you were in high school. Is that anywhere to see? I would love to see that.
This is the one with Tim Burton, right?
No. Tim and I were later.
Right.
The Super 8 thing when I was a junior in high school, it's got to be somewhere maybe in boxes in my parents' house or something.
Wow. You should put it up somewhere. I love seeing like where people start off from and where they progress to. I love seeing that.
Well, I did. My wife found a box. I haven't looked through it yet, but she said, "Oh, your parents saved a bunch of your flip books you made when you were a kid, and here they are in a box." So about 3 weeks ago, I brought them home, but I haven't looked through to flip them yet. So awesome. We're going to uncover some of that stuff probably.
Yeah.
But no, speaking of the Tim Burton film, Dr. Burton, there it is.
Yeah.
That's the first the black and white spoof of a horror movie that Tim and I made. So Annie got in touch with me because they said, we heard that you have the film. And I said, yeah, it's got dust on it. I have it right here. So they carted it away and scanned it and then brought it back to me. So when they did the Tim Burton retrospective, I gave them photographs and footage to use from our time together.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
Tim was supposed to be here today as well, but he didn't return any of my calls. So.
You wanted to see a person crumble. Like I've been a fan of his stuff for forever. Like even back, I think he did like there was like, was it Family Dog or something? It was like a short in like
he was involved
Disney
with
thing.
that. Yeah, Tim, he did design stuff on that. Brad and Tim had
on that. I had a Family Dog stuffed animal just because Tim Burton was involved in that. Like I don't know, I've been a fan of his forever. But that's crazy. I mean, it's awesome. And it's good to hear too that a big company like that. I mean, I really haven't heard a lot of bad things. Like I know that there's some stuff that gets thrown out there about working for Disney and like how whatever, but the majority of times I've ever been able to interact with anyone who's been involved in Disney, they've always had a very, very pleasant experience working there and, really enjoyed their time.
Yeah. Last week we had Michael McGreevy who, So he was on and he was saying that recently they redid Walt's office and they invited him to go there and he started crying and a lady put her hand on his shoulder and said, "It's okay, Mike. We had Haley Mills here a couple weeks ago and she sobbed too." But I guess it was just so powerful because it, got put back to the way it was before.
Yeah, I took that tour. Bob Weiss invited me and to go with a team through that. I had just worked on a number of projects sort of behind the scenes, helping with things. And they said, "Well, how would you group sort of as a thank you? We want to take you to Walt's redone office." So we took that tour as well. And it was amazing that, Dave Smith had taken thousands of photographs of how things were left when Walt passed away. And so they went through and like even inside of drawers, like you got a drawer and things were sitting where they were supposed to be. And one of the cutest things to me was while the guy was giving the tour, he went over to the curtain and he pulls back the curtain and on the windowsill hidden from view are a couple little sculptures. And he said, "I don't know why Walt had them there, but we put them back there after people had cleaned and stuff." We went, "Yeah, Dave Smith showed, his photos show that behind the curtain were these. So we put them back behind the curtain." And there was the piano that the Sherman Brothers would use to play music for him in his own office. That was sitting there.
Did you see the Kurt Russell note?
Remind me which.
So supposedly the day Walt died, there was a piece of paper on his desk that said Kurt Russell with a question mark, but I guess it had three other names.
I didn't notice that one.
It was misspelled too, right?
Yeah,
it was misspelled.
Kurt KRIT because he could. I guess he always spelled Kurt Russell's name wrong or whatever.
I don't know. Well, I took a bunch of pictures when I went through. I'll have to look back through my photos and see if I noticed.
Yeah, because Michael said that he took a picture of it and sent it to Kurt because him and Kurt are still friends, and he's just like, "What? You're in Walt's office? This is crazy." But
now, did you meet Walt a few times in your day?
No, I never did. I
really?
was really upset that he had smoked so much because I thought if he hadn't smoked, he probably would have lived a number of years longer for us to get to know. But I read such a sweet article about him, and I asked for the archives to look it up, and they did find it. It was when Disneyland was being built, and there was a kid who was dying of cancer, and they weren't going to live long enough to see the park. But it was partially constructed, and Walt gave the kid a ride in the train around the park that was being built. And just this Walt and the kid went, and the rest of the family stayed behind and watched, and they saw him stop the train and then get up and be like gesturing and telling stories and painting pictures for the kid. And what a gift that he took the time to do that for a child that would not be there for the opening day of Disneyland, but paint the fantasy picture and stories for him out on the train. That part was built to go around the park. And I just thought, well, I wish you had stayed around longer. Like he became that dying person that I wish had stayed around longer. But it's amazing that all of that happened. His work constantly on Buena Vista Street at the studio, and then where he died at St. Joseph's was just across the street. It was directly across the street. And they talked about, trying to encourage him to stay in the hospital because he would get dressed and, go across to look through the animation studio. When he was under hospital care, he would still go over there to check what was going on in the studio at night. And so somebody took his shoes from his hospital bed. Said, well, he won't have his shoes to go over there. He went over barefoot. So it's awesome. It's amazing that he just all the way to the end was so focused on what was happening creatively, and I always just mourned the fact that I was not able to ever meet him.
Yeah, but the people that like helped
hearing their stories was the closest that we got.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. The people that you worked with all knew Walt, probably very well. So I'm sure that he would have been proud of what you were doing as well. If they were proud of it, I'm sure that's something to at least know in the back of your mind. Like he probably would have dug this. Yeah.
Yeah. And Floyd Norman has great stories about Walt and as well. So that's interesting too, that you have somebody who joined more recently because the veterans were there with him from the Snow White days, but Floyd came in partway through, and so he has stories about if you're more of a newbie going in, what it was like, and it's all their stories were great. I was so to this day, Walt's performance as Mickey Mouse in the Pointer, where they're versus the big grizzly bear, and Mickey and Pluto are out on a hunting trip, and the big grizzly bear comes behind Mickey, and he thinks it's just Pluto. And he's sort of telling, stay back. And he's like whacking him with the gun and stuff. And then he hears the roar and he turns around and he sees that it's the giant bear. Well, that whole performance where Mickey tries to talk his way out of trouble with the bear was Walt Disney doing the Mickey voice.
Oh, wow.
And it's so funny. It's so contemporary. He's like, I'm Mickey Mouse, Mickey Mouse. And he like gestures. He gestures down the like Mickey Mouse, like that little character. And it's so self-aware. Like I'm the little Mickey Mouse character that you might know. And it just seems like something that a contemporary animator might have done now. And it was so fresh and funny. And they just said, Frank Thomas said he just was watching Walt while he was doing that performance. And sadly, they didn't film it. But in his gestural stuff in the animation, he was trying to capture what Walt had done while he was performing the voice. And so just really made it come alive. That's one of the most delightful Mickeys.
Yeah. Sure.
Now, I mean, you've worked with, Walter Cronkite, George Lucas for the Star Wars stuff, Steven Spielberg, but let's talk about one person, but we don't want to stay there. But this person just celebrated the anniversary of their death, and we lost him way before his time as well. Yep. What an incredible talent! I know you know exactly who I'm talking about.
Yep.
But he was another person who would be in a sound booth. Instead of just reading lines, he'd be like, "Oh, that hurt," doing all this stuff. Robin Williams. So what was it like in your experience working with him, and I don't know, just the creativity that guy had, and the talent.
It was absolutely delightful, and I must say that Robin Williams was as charming and heartwarming and wonderful as you would ever wish he would be. Exactly. And Walter Cronkite was just as sharp and charming and intelligent, and the twinkle in his eye, like all of the stuff that you sort of fantasized that Cronkite was, he was all of that too. Like they both really lived up to exactly what your wish for them was who they really were in real life. And it was particularly delightful with Robin because I got to first think of the idea of using Robin because they had. I'll try to make this quick, but there was sorry about that.
That's okay.
There was a project, a film already going to be made. Mark Kirkland, great friend of mine, who's directed probably more Simpsons episodes than anyone else, I think. He was line producer on a show, and he just called me out of the blue. This was just after Toaster, and he said, we've been working on a project for about 9-10 months for Disney. It's it's a film, and it has live action and animation ideally, and it's supposed to explain why Disney animation is special. We feel like the wind's going out of the sails, even though Frank and Ollie have been involved in collaborating. And I love your storytelling sense. Can you please come take a look at what we're doing? We just need fresh eyes. So I went over just to be fresh eyes. Looked at it, and they had two really well-developed versions of a film. One was Carol Burnett and Donald Duck. The other one was Siskel and Ebert, who were reviewers at the time. And I just told them frankly that, the reason they asked me in is because I had been a Disney feature animator. So they said, since we're trying to explain what makes Disney animation special, you would have a good perspective on this. So I just told them, all due respect, I don't think any of these crack the nut of what makes Disney animation special. It just describes a lot of technical stuff that any animation studio could brag on. It's like how many drawings per second. And if you stacked up features where the drawings, they'd go to the moon and all that. But that's not what makes Disney animation special. So I got on my soapbox and went into a bunch of stuff about, it's every department is the story department. You don't choose a color because it's pretty. You choose it because what it says emotionally about the character right now. And props are the story department. The sound is the story department. Everything is. So I got in this whole thing, and I met with them the next morning, and I said, if I were you, they asked me to come in again, and they said, think of it overnight. Let's have some more chat. So I had written up a thing and said, if I were you guys, I would use somebody like Robin Williams and let him hear the message of animation is all about emotion, and then let him go into it and become an animated character and feel all those emotions happen, have the color to happen to him, and then feel what the color means, and have the sound happen and have him feel what that means, and prove to him as a character that once he goes inside and has all those things happen to him, every department is the story department, he feels emotion. So they, had the guts. Bob Rogers at the time, I was over at his little studio. He called the studio and said, that, and I was there for the call. I heard that on the other end of the line, but it's like, the stuff we've been doing for the last 10 months or so, we're thinking of unplugging it. And they're like, what? Well, this guy, Jerry Rees. Jerry Rees, well, he used to be an animator there. So, all those guys, Schneider, et cetera, who had come in didn't know me because they, I was at an era before them. To me, they were the new kids on the block. They saw me as the new kid on the block. No, been there before. But then they said, he hung up and said, okay, you've got, 4 weeks to show something to Schneider. And then if it gets past him, you've got so many weeks to show it to Katzenberg. And I went, what are you talking about? You asked me to come by and give an opinion. And they said, no, you have to direct this. So suddenly was, I went from just stop by and give an opinion to being shoved into the director's chair. But then my next task was convincing them to use Robin because, Jeffrey's first reaction was crotch grabbing adult comic, Disney animation doesn't fit. I know it said, I know you're trying to be an auteur. Do the Jerry Rees thing, but this is a legacy. It's Disney. So I went back with him and said, okay, let's go back to the legacy. Do you think Jiminy Cricket was a charming Disney character? Yes. Well, did you realize that he was voiced by Cliff Edwards, whose stage name was Ukulele Ike, and he was known for Working Blue. He would do dirty joke records that you could buy. When you went out to see Pinocchio, you could also get a dirty joke, dirty song record from the guy who voiced Jiminy Cricket. And sadly, he died of substance abuse problems. So, I think that we're kind of following in Walt's footsteps, where he saw somebody that was tremendously gifted, that had some challenges and problems, but he looked past that to immortalize the charm, like the part that they are so gifted at. Let's grab that and immortalize it, and maybe try to coax them out of the other problems. So anyway, so then there was a begrudging, well, okay, but only because it's a short in the park. It's far away from the Disney feature animation department where it will be judged by all the people in the Bible Belt and all that stuff. So since it's far away from that, and if it fails, it's just a short that failed, and so we won't be too damaged, I'll allow you to do the experiment. So there was all of that before even getting to work with him. But then it was so great, RW, and all the rest of you I went to meet him first to get his voice tracks laid down up in the Bay Area. And then I came back down here and shot him in live action down here in LA. And he was so sweet and connected and charming, and was also respectful of the writing. Like I had storyboards of everything to show him. So I'd take him through and go, here's this and this and this. And it had, of course, dialogue panels under everything. And so he said, well, I hope there'll be a little room to play because, I'd like to improvise a bit. And so I said, well, absolutely. I said, I just had to write what you might say so that when I would show it to executives, they would kind of get the potential comedic flow. But absolutely, I said, the reason I wanted you is because of what you do. So you, from here to here, you can totally play, and from here to here, totally play. But I need you to give this last setup line for Walter because he needs to say his next thing. And so when I got to like the fourth or fifth fling where I invited him to play, he said, well, I don't want to change everything. There's some good writing here. So, and in fact, at the end of his big improvisation metamorphosis scene, where he's like, I could be anything, and he goes through all these different things, the last thing he says is, hi, everybody, I'm a corporate symbol. And he's Mickey. That actually was not improvised. That was something that Steve Moore, one of my storyboard artists, had put up, and I just went, that's so funny, Steve. I pinned it up. Robin busted a gut laughing at that the first time he saw it on my storyboard, and he kept it in. So he would improvise, but he would always like hit that because he went, I like that line.
That's
so
funny.
he was able to also shape things that really shocked me, that he would want to huddle beforehand and know a bunch of things to put in his head to play with. It's like, whether this and this going on at the time, this film you could refer to. It's like, okay, I got it. And then he would go record something, and then I could go back to him and say, oh man, that thing you did in the middle was so funny. Can you put that at the end? He's like, oh, sure. And then we do another take, and he would make it sound just as fresh and stick that bit of improv at the very end. And I didn't know he could shape that fountain of ideas. So it was like that would happen as just a gushing of ideas, and then he could shape it and do take after take where he would continue to work with it. And that startled me in the best way. And just so genuinely sweet. And Marcia, who was his wife at the time, and she was so good for him. I'm not sure why ultimately it didn't work out, but at the time she was really helping him sort of guide him and keep him off of substances and stuff like that. And she was very good for him. We talked to her because the recording session was going quite long. And so since we were going to keep him past time, we wanted to huddle, and Don Ernst was with me in the editing room. He was my producer. And this was the cool thing, is the metamorphosis animation of Robin in our film was the precursor to him being cast as the genie in Aladdin. And like one led to the other. And in Aladdin, they put a permanent thank you by having their animated genie dressed very similarly to the way Robin showed up in my film in live action. So they put that permanent little thank you in the feature. But so Don Ernst was continuum between both. So he was there with me on Brave Little Toaster, and then on Back to Neverland, and then he went with Robin onto Aladdin. And so we huddled with her and said, we're working him long hours. Is this okay? And she said, he's having so much fun right now, and he's really revved up. And if you send him out on time, if you break it at time, he won't want to stop, and he'll convince me to drive to a club, and we'll go in the club, and they'll look out and they'll go, hey, look who's here, it's Robin. And then he'll go, oh, okay, I'll come up and do a little bit. And then he'll do 45-minute set, and we'll get home so late. Please keep him here. So she, we had this private discussion. And so I just went and kept working with Robin then. And I knew that we had her blessing and her perspective on it. And then cut to, after we finished the whole thing, I was in post, I was picking up a few lines of dialogue. He asked me to come after the recording session to see him in Waiting for Godot with Steve Martin. He was co-starring with him. And that was the first time I met Steve, and didn't know I would be directing him years later. And so he had asked me to come stay and do that. And so I did. I stayed an extra night. I went to see him. He saved a chair for me because tickets were sold out. And then I went to his dressing room afterwards, and he was talking passionately about why he did the play and what he thought it meant to him emotionally. And Marcia was there again. And this time, when he's offering to oh, do you have a ride home? It's dangerous out there. I said, oh, that's okay. I'll walk. And he's like, no, you should get in the car. And so I see her looking over the shoulder, and she's like, no. She didn't let him see, but she's like, we've been nice to you. He gave you special tickets. You're here in the dressing room. We're done. So I didn't let him know I was seeing that, but I'm like, oh no, it's completely safe. I'm close to the hotel. I'll just walk. But he was to a fault thinking of others and caring and all of that. I was always amazed. Instead of him like, yeah, see you later, I'm jumping in my limo. He's like, I want you to be safe. Come with me,
That's
So,
awesome.
Nice.
Just sweet.
Very cool to hear. There should be a documentary about your career. I'm just saying, like, it's no, for real. Like, just listening to the stories, I'm like, oh crap, I would like to see like you were gonna pull up photos and stuff like that. I'm like, it would be great to see like a slideshow along with this, or even just like some,
Yeah, I do
some
have
footage.
a collection of a number of things, but we couldn't quite get the sharing thing to work.
Yeah.
for this
No,
episode.
but still, I would pay to see that for sure. So, so moving on from there,
Yep.
you went on to do things like Tron, which RW's enthralled with.
Yes.
And so you've kind of your career's changed a bunch, like since the beginning.
Len.
Yeah. So do you want to talk a little bit about that transition, like how you went into the whole computer side of things?
Yeah.
And...
Well, to me, that was continuing the exploration I did with the bird. Where it was delighting people and frightening others. So, you had the two directors looking through the stacks of drawings and going, no, you can't do that. But other people watching the film and going like, yay, we like this. And I just, and Eric was so encouraging to like, keep exploring, keep bringing new things into your life and into our storytelling palette. So when I saw Tron come along, to me, it was a similar thing. It was like, oh, I remember like when I looked at that little bird and I had something strike me like, this is a problem to be solved. You could unlock something new here. I saw the computer group coming in, and I had, if you go on the Wayback Machine to high school, I don't know why, but I was doing, I was dedicated to music and creative writing and fine art. I was doing portraiture and animation and hiking and all kinds of stuff. But then I took as an elective Fortran computer language in advanced math class. And I didn't have to take that, but I took it as an elective. And I just, for some reason, was really intrigued by that. So only 2 of us from the high school were allowed to go up to the medical center where med students were taking Fortran. And so 2 of us from high school sat in on that class. And so here I am going like, I don't know why I did that. I don't know why that would ever come into play, computer and puzzle solving and writing code. And so years later, he's like, Tron. It's like, I'm a Disney feature animator. I'm trained with that. And now my computer language thing, hey, that's kind of, it all is merging now. And so, boy, did I knock on that door because we were between films. We were, Cauldron hadn't happened yet. There were the whole group of us who had been so inspired by Star Wars and thought we should be doing things that revolutionary, weren't seeing it happen. We had the veterans encouraging us to go towards that. And we had the people managing the studio at the time, the 70s, kind of not at all interested in taking some big risks. What are you talking about? It's like, we just have to get the next film done on budget. And so to me, this was back to, oh my gosh, there's a chance to be shocking again and to do some big discovery again. And I've messed around with computers. I know that you teach them things to do. They don't automatically just do things. You teach them processes to do, and they follow your lead. So maybe as artists, we could make the computer be one of our brushes, or a bigger canvas to work on. So yeah, I dove in there. I knocked on the door, and Tom Wilhite was a producer at Disney, and later would be my producer on Brave Little Toaster as well. But he said, okay, maybe there's a spot for you. And so I met Kushner and Lisberger and various people. So they did invite me to come work on the project. And at the time, the CG stuff hadn't started yet. It was going to happen, but production storyboards were happening for just to get all the stuff of the actors filmed. And so I was told, yes, you can go up and do that. The rest of my friends were all down in the animation department downstairs and waiting for the next film. And this is an important thing. There was such talent in that group. And immediately, of course, all of these creative brains, they were like, hey, let's make short films together. We're like a whole animation crew with nothing to do. Let's make films. And they were told by management, no, you cannot. You can't join forces and make any films. You have to wait, but you have to come to the office and sit here, and you can have coffee and you can read the paper and you can do doodle drawings or whatever you want to do. And you can take art classes 1 or 2 days a week, but you can't make films together. Like, damn. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to go make a film. I'm going to make a film with these guys. I'm going to figure out something about this new computer stuff. And so I go in, and it's very sort of put together in a rush. Tron, it's like a sort of just collided with the studio, and had to be so many different people, so many disciplines suddenly working together. And so I go in and there's no sort of orderly desks and here's your spot. It was just like, here's a room and there's people already working in it. And I don't see any place to sit down. And Mobius is sitting there and he's like, pull up a chair. And I'm like, what? Yes, you will sit at my desk. So we had a flat desk. And so for the duration of production storyboards, he invited me and I sat face to face with him during that whole time. And I would watch him doing these beautiful drawings flowing out of his pen. And I was like covering my hand and trying to like, but he was so great about teaching me and other people how to do like pen marker things where you could do shading. If he said, if you plan ahead of time, you get the light to dark range that you want to use. And then you go in and you puddle in this one. And then before it dries, you quickly grab the other one, which you have ready. And then you go and you can do tones. And it's like, wow. So he was teaching us stuff as well as just getting the job done. So yeah, my first thing was production storyboard. So I was so glad to do things like arrange for Flynn and Yori to kiss with the beam directly behind them. I made sure that the carrier got over there so the beam would like gloriously backlight their kiss and stuff like that. So all kinds of things like that, where it was just dealing with the actors and how they would do the storytelling in that part of it. Then, as that began to finish off and we had all the production boards done, then I segued over onto the computer image choreography. So yeah, Bill Croy and I wound up being the only two people that were responsible for shepherding all the computer scenes through. And then there were great people like John Van Fleet and Daryl Rooney and Craig Reynolds and all the kind of people that were dealing with the hand-done visual effects that were critical to TRON to look the way it did. And, Sid Mead and Mobius and Peter Lloyd and all those people that just made the film look that beautiful way. A lot of people don't realize that backlight glow stuff was not the result of computer imagery. That was hand-done, handcrafted frame-by-frame art on an animation stand with filters for coloration and stacks of animation and hold-out mats and things. And by the way, now where we can just go into Photoshop and click color fill with black.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that was all of the black was hand-painted onto cells. For all the blackout mats, where you go, everything is black except for his eyes. Okay, paint all of that with black paint except for the eyes. Like, and this one, the eyes are blacked out, but everything else is there. Okay,
yeah. Martin Fisher just wants to point out he's a huge fan of TRON, and it was pure magic. And yeah, have you seen? I think it was Corridor Crew did like a breakdown of like between the remake and the original and just comparing them. And I want to say that they tried to redo the same effects from the original one. Like, because it took so much time to do the computer part of stuff, trying to do it as quickly as possible just to see if they could actually match it, kind of deal. Have you ever seen that?
I haven't seen them try to replicate it.
It's pretty good. It's Corridor Crew, the visual effects artists, and they go through and they break down this stuff, and it's like visual effects artists react and stuff like that. It's pretty good. It's pretty interesting stuff.
And
for the computer graphics, there was no animation software, and it was essentially stop motion. You could render a light shaded shell of a thing, and then for one frame. And so it was up to Bill and I to let people know, well, where should it be for the next frame? So it was a whole bunch of single frame renderings of objects, and we would time where they should be for each frame. So there was no like spline and A/B and slow in, slow out, like none of that. There was none of that software. So we would by hand do the math for what a slow in and slow out might be. And I did show when I was there Friday before last at El Capitan. One of the teams I showed was the two recognizers that I had diving into a canyon to chase the light cycles as they were escaping. And they go into a hole in the wall, and the two Ricos rebound as if there's magnetic force that's making them repel against each other. There was no physics algorithm for that. I just went down to the downshooter camera in the animation department where I had worked before, and I did stop motion of just the legs of recognizers I drew and cut out. And I just did grid paper and did talk marks with a pencil and did stop motion until it looked like it had magnetic force, and then gave the math back to them. So again, like stop motion, park it here for this frame. Okay, next frame, park it here for this frame. And But people take for granted now. It's like, sure, physics algorithm. Like there was such thing.
But if it wasn't for things like Tron, though, like I don't know. I mean, I'm sure some of the software that was created was people that were influenced by seeing stuff like Tron. You know?
No doubt. And one of the graphics I put up showed what looks like a curve, spline curve to show slow ins and slow outs and stuff. But it was just me visualizing that with a pencil. Like here's a second 1, second 2, second 3, and Rico is turning, and I want it to tilt this many degrees, but I don't want it to be even timing or it'll look dead. I want it to slow in and slow out. So I would draw the curve of slow in and slow out, which was different going in and coming out. But it was all for every single frame. You would look at the curve and go, what is the math for where the point is now? And so you look at it now and you go, well, yeah. Then you go into After Effects, you've got those splines all over the place. It's like there was no computer spline. This was a hand-drawn spline to express the character of motion that we wanted. And then we had to turn that into just single math numbers per frame.
Wow.
So
Robert, you were saying something, I interrupted you. I'm sorry, Robert. What were you saying?
No, I remember seeing behind the scenes, and when you're just talking about the math, that we see all the magic of it. And behind the scenes, I just grids and grids of numbers that that you were doing. I was like, well, I'm glad we got to enjoy the magic of it.
Well, it was kind of perfect training to deal with all of that, to have come out of Disney animation, where again, it's like there's no automated way to get in between extreme poses. It's like you draw every single frame, and you don't do it robotically. You do it with expression and with slow ins and slow outs. And if you're hand animating something where a character's wearing a wool coat, it will have different drag and overlap because you make it so than if it had silk. You think about that. So you're thinking about physics and timing and acting and storytelling while you sit there and make every frame happen. So to go into the computer and go, oh, storytelling and what's the emotional impact of the scene, but you have to break it into storyboards and then poses. And then in this case, also floor plan and elevation for a place that doesn't exist. So I would just make up, here's a canyon, here's like a half cylinder it's diving past, here's some things that are on the outside that it runs into. And you would just make it up at the time and then give that to the people. So I was doing a little bit more, but it was very similar thinking to being a feature animator, where stacks of empty pages become emoting. And here it was, stacks of empty frames become pixels that give performance. So yes, I'm glad that you only thought about the dynamics of the scene that was happening and didn't think at all about the math.
My El Capitan, invitation got lost in the mail, so I don't.
I only knew about it 2 weeks before, and I gave them my photo, and it just I don't know quite happened with the publicity of that. After I came back, I looked through social media and I found somewhere a really nice invitation that had all our pictures on it, but I only found that after the event. So I'm not quite sure how the invites went out. But
a lot of people don't realize, and you can expand on this more, but all the scenes of Jeff Bridges and Bruce Boxleitner, everybody when they're on the grid, and you say, they're either red or blue, hand painted, but it took 24 different layers to make one frame of film. So you had to do all these black and white layers and then colored layers and put them all together and then rephotograph that. Yeah, you had 24 layers to make one more frame of film.
You had to roll back the negative again and re-expose it, and then roll it back again and re-expose it. And as John Van Vliet was explaining, sometimes you would do that 70 times for one shot. And so they were worried about the perforations getting too worn so that registration could go off. And I think actually some of that just raw usage and wear gave some of the, it was so hand done that the perforation starting to wear, or the hand done blackout mats and some of the registration getting a little off, etc., gave this sort of weird tick to the footage. So it had these little quirks. And to me, that read like energy that's living in it and crackling. It's like when you watch a fireplace and there's sparks and things that happen. And of course, the sound guys smartly added little buzzes, and they would sometimes add an extra glow somewhere when something like that would happen. So it was kind of an inherent eccentricity to to take away the ultimate smoothness of things. It was like interrupted smoothness with little quirks, and so they would give an audio character to it, so everything would seem intentional.
It was your version of adding the blue marks,
right?
To do it on purpose. Yeah.
Yes.
So Martin's saying he's got 11 of the original. Was it Codolith?
Yep.
Cells from Tron in his collection.
I have one.
Nice.
I have the Sark, but they're pretty expensive. I'm glad I got mine for what I got it for. But now you mentioned working on the light cycles, tanks, and recognizers with Bill Croyer. And earlier you mentioned another Croyer. Were they married at the time, or you?
Yes. No, they weren't married at the time, but they just the same way that Rebecca and I later became a couple. Sue and Bill later became a couple. So they were starting to become a couple, but it didn't become a marriage until later. And thankfully, we're all still together. So
that's awesome.
Now,
it's not something you hear in Hollywood that much. Yes, like you don't hear that in the industry.
Did you know Bill at the same time that you knew Sue, or did you meet him later on?
We met about the same time. Actually, Bill, again, where Rebecca and I both came into the animation department from different paths. She came through Art Center into Disney. I came from CalArts into Disney. Sue came into Disney. I forget which school she came through, and then Bill came in as well. So it was just that whole group, that squad that met. And so in those early days, actually, there's the Rat's Nest photo. And as you know, we did a panel where all of us rats got together. But the Rat's Nest photo Bill was one of the rats. So he was one of the official rats.
Amazing. A lot of the amount of people who came out of that, who've done, like Eric Lasseter and
John Lasseter. Yeah.
John Lasseter. Sorry. And I was thinking Eric, somebody else. But yeah, like all these people, Tim Burton worked on it, I guess, very minutely. There's a rumor, and I don't know, maybe you can expand on this, but Jeff Bridges wasn't the original choice for Flynn. They actually wanted Robin Williams. Is that true?
I have no idea. I have not heard that rumor.
Because Bonnie McBird had said something about she originally thought or wanted Robin, so I didn't know if that was.
Donald Kushner Friday at the El Capitan said that he had just been in, I think, the Last Picture Show, and that they loved him and they just wanted him.
Yeah, Jeff Bridges, and last week we talked about Kurt Russell, but like those are my two go-to guys. I there's nothing Kurt and Jeff have ever done that was like, oh, this is the worst movie I've ever seen. So,
and you know what was so fitting? People would think this is made up, but it's not. Is on the set when I was doing production boards and we were filming the actors, that part of it before CG. Jeff would come over and play Battlezone. We had, there was an arcade version of Battlezone. So I would go up into it, and I had this strategy where I knew that if I see the tank shooting at me, if I would back up and turn, I could just avoid the projectile, and I would do these series of backup turns things, even when I lost sight of it, until I could finally get back in sight and then shoot it. And so I had this strategy of my own, and I had worked up some pretty high points. And then Bill Croyer went in, and he had worked up some high points. So we were like jousting. And then Jeff would they'd call cut, and he'd come between takes, jump up into the machine, and blow us both away. and he called it getting into the zone, that he needed to get into the zone. And we would go back to shoot. And sometimes they'd wait to film until he was finished with the machine because he had to get back into the grid zone. But that kept being a running thing where Bill and I would look at his new score and go, oh, damn, okay, we got to get this. And then one of us would, and then he'd come back and blow it away again. And how perfect, huh? For Flynn.
But you know what the trick is, right? It's all in the wrist.
It's all in the wrist. Yeah. You got it. Well, I haven't learned that yet. I thought it was still in the fingers.
Yeah. So do you have are you still working on stuff? Is there anything that you're involved with that you can talk about a little bit? Or?
Yeah, well, I 22 theme park attractions to date, and then a bunch of experiments beyond that. I had just finished a 5-year stint as an executive R&D Imagineer, most recently 2015 to 2020. So the pandemic is what stopped that. Otherwise, we would have just kept roaring along. And so unfortunately, that whole division and a lot of Disney was quite gutted. So yeah, that was the only reason that the momentum stopped on that. But during that time, I was creative lead on AI companion characters, conversational characters, and that bloomed, sadly, without our giant team, but Sarah Wolfick, genius writer, coaxed with a tiny version of the team, finished a character, the character in the conversation, the communications droid on the Galactic Star Cruiser. So the D309 character is something we had a really in-depth, ambitious plans for, and at least a pared down, but a version of her exists there. But we're looking to really crack the nut of the illusion of life in artificial intelligence as it pertains to making a character come alive and stay in its own personality zone, and to illustrate bonding with you, so that it gets to know any of the three of you, and would, if you show up, it would start off its conversation differently for each one of you, because you'd have a different history and rapport, and it would stay in character as itself. So a lot of hard work for that over a number of years. And then I was also creative lead on the free walking autonomous robot thing. And you probably saw that recently, RW, and I don't know if the other guys did, but I got 3 Disney Inventor Awards during that period, where we had patents that were given for that. And my passion for and there is Scott Lavallee and just brilliant people working on the robot, but I was tasked in these things as creative lead to try to shepherd all of it towards all the efforts of these genius PhDs toward the illusion of life. So how do you take all of that brilliance and have them understand what it takes for acting and emoting to happen? So, for example, when they needed range of motion for the engineering, my task was to say, it's not range of motion where typically there's like calisthenics and you do that extremes and you're done. I went, we need range of emotion to drive it. So I wrote a story that's continuous to take a character through many different emotions, and had a really good actor, not just one of us putting on a suit. A brilliant Stasha Surdike, who's a seasoned performer, get in all that gear. She could ignore all the capture gear and just do a really heartfelt performance and hit all the comedic and tear-jerking moments, etc. And that took the engineers through all these chapters of different kinds of speeds of things. Either things were really subtle and nuanced and fidgety, where you go, well, I wouldn't normally engineer for that. I normally just have like a finger complete its path and I'm done. But to give it the nuance to do a little fiddle, or to do a start to do something and then abandon because somebody interrupts or whatever, all these little nuances would start to come to the front as engineering needs. And then like fast movements with big pose changes, if a character got angry or got excited. And so range of emotion set a much better range of motion for engineering. So this was the first time that we've ever know of that a whole team of top engineers were engineering directly off of emotional range to even think about how you engineer joints and servos and all that good stuff. And miniaturized so that you could do characters where you understand that no person is wearing that suit. If you see a life-size Yoda, nobody's in that. And if he's walking around and able to carry on conversations with you and not be on a track and not be nailed down anywhere, it's just a huge breakthrough. So stuff like that. And also just projection experiments for blended reality. And I'm still right now, actually late last night, was getting something to a team member in Europe where I have Rick Rothschild, who's a brilliant writer, director, creator of themed entertainment stuff. He's Soaring Over California. Soaring Over California was his flying theater, and he's just opened a new one in Vegas, where he does these flying theaters now outside of Disney as well. But he's got like 24, 25 attractions inside Disney. I've got 22 inside of Disney. We're currently have joined forces. We have R2 is our group, and the 2 R's being Rees and Rothschild. And, he's been president of the Themed Entertainment Association and is one of the TIA masters out there, and is one of the geniuses. So we have joined forces and are currently working on a number of projects. And I've got a bunch of other things that I've been trying to get going for years with, before any of the metaverse stuff happened, like in 2007, I went with, actually it was Alison Savich, was chairperson of New Media for the Producers Guild. She was used to having people knock on the producer's door to get, say, new technology to James Cameron, et cetera. So from way back in 2005, 6, 7, she was used to calling me first and saying like, "Hey, Jerry, we just had this new tech package come in. Like, what can we do with it?" And so we would do this brainstorming stuff. And then after that, then she'd get it to James. So it was one of those times where I had been working on a breakthrough in avatars and to try to take the immersive space of that people were seeing grow up in games and have it graduate beyond always being the next game to be immersive space we could share, and where immersion means companionship. And it really puts us together in a meaningful, emotional way for astounding global communication, like changing the standard of global communication. That was just my small to-do list thing. But anyway, she was aware of that. She would participate. She was helping me connect with people. So in 2007, she called me and said, the Sheikh is looking for, of Dubai, is looking for new cities. Maybe we could do like a new city. So we put our heads together, and so I'd put together a deck for Infinity City, and it would meant to be the first city that would be built physically and virtually at the same time with best interfaces practices for both, and called Infinity City because the population is part of it's physically there, part of it is connecting with those people through blended reality, some of it projection, some of it VR, some of it AR, etc. But to make sure that everybody gets included, not just only the people with VR. To have an infinite population in this actual city where everything is useful. Like, yes, you can still use it for games, but the big breakthrough is to use it for, instead of always escaping reality, to expand reality. So actually we showed it to them, and it won us 8 days of pitching it in 3 of the Emirates. So in 2007, I was pitching a metaverse and beyond in 3 of the Emirates. And at the time, the infrastructure for global connectivity was not there yet. My dream was that the Billionaires Club would kind of take it under the wing to say, well, let's rebuild the world infrastructure. But most of them just wanted cool effects for their office to show off when people would stop by instead of changing the world yet. So, but yes, I still am absolutely passionate about that. And I'm trying to, I look at Meta and I see Zuckerberg's efforts and stuff. It's great. I'm glad somebody's going there, and their work inside actually for people wearing the gear, but having their face rendered without a mask on it. There's truly remarkable stuff happening there without uncanny valley stuff, by the way. But I still see that particular effort as very VR centric. And for a long time, I've always felt like blended reality rather than virtual, rather than choosing virtual or choosing augmented or choosing only projections, that it's reality, projections in reality, augmented reality, and virtual reality all can absolutely commingle and connect everyone. Who's like somebody that doesn't want to wear goggles can still connect with somebody who is running around with goggles and still see and hear them with true presence. So I'm still waiting for these niches to grow up, and I keep advocating always for the merging of them, where instead of always the next game, it's about connecting human beings. And it can always be used for games, but I think that the miracle is connecting people. And I'll just tell you a quick story about, I was on my way to an all things virtual session in my first year, I think, as an executive R&D Imagineer. So it was probably 2015 or 2016. But it was a couple of days of all things immersive up at the Lucas Ranch, or at the city on the San Francisco city side. And the driver, probably about 30 years old, he didn't know who I was or where I was going. He knew where he was dropping me off. But I asked him what he was up to, and he said, "Oh, my wife and I are putting together a fledgling film company, and we're trying to do projects that inspire inner city youth that they can really make something of themselves." And so he went on with that. And I said, "What do you think about some of the new tools that are available?" And he said, "Well, I'm using FaceTime now because I'm doing this driving gig, but my wife and daughter, I really miss them. So I'm actually using that to see them as often as possible while I'm doing this driving gig." And I said, "Well, what do you think about VR?" And he goes, and he told me 2 things, and neither one of them were, "Do the next game." He goes, and this is like young guy, maybe approaching 30. And he goes, "Okay, I don't want you think that I'm weird talking to dead people and stuff, but my grandma who's no longer with us, used to give me the best pep talk. And he said, if I could sit on the couch next to her, not like watch a video or listen to a tape, but actually have her look me in the eye and feel her presence and have her say, Willie, you can be anything you want to be. Stick with it. He said, if I could feel her pep talk in person, eye to eye again, he goes, oh my God, VR is for me. And then the second thing he told me, I had actually sketched at my desk at Disney 2 weeks before. He goes, imagine you're with the military and you get a break, but not enough time to get all the way home. So you step into a capture volume and you can be in your living room and your toddler is there and comes up to you and you talk. And I had drawn that exact thing. It's like the military person, the toddler at their knees. And so, I just took that as a signal, like the magic out there for these immersive things. We keep immersing again and again, but eventually people are going to realize it's not always for exploding things and making points. Sometimes it's for being with someone I love or getting to know someone and starting to love them. It's like, the magic is erasing the distance between us, no matter where we're stuck on the planet, even if we're not rich enough to get on a plane and go to the place and get in the hotel and stuff, to just suddenly on a whim, be face to face and feel like you're in the presence. And to, by the way, not retarget everything. And it's like, instead, like reflect our own micro expressions so that we can read each other the way evolution prepared us. Instead of, I've told people, look, as a director, if I hire Meryl Streep to be in my thing and I'm going to do motion capture of her, and I think brilliant actors in motion capture can do brilliant things. I don't think there's anything, I was never a fan of rotoscope, but I think brilliant actors in motion capture can make brilliant results. But if I do that and I get Meryl Streep, I don't want you, no matter how genius engineer you are, I don't want you retargeting her expressions. Okay. It's like, she has this magical thing and we can't figure it out, but she keeps doing this magic every time she acts. I want that to come through. I don't want you to go, well, I took her smile where she had this magical thing, but I made it my sort of retargeted thing and I took it 20% wider. It's like, go away.
Yeah.
I want to capture her. And by the way, when you're talking to someone you know and love, you will also not want them retargeted. You want to be able to read what's going on with them in the moment. So there's a bunch of things that are on my list of like things I'm passionate about as we build the shared space. So
yeah, no, that's pretty interesting. I mean, I see things go in that direction more and more every day for the most part. Like everything's going more virtual. Whether or not it'll happen completely in my lifetime, I don't know. I'd like to hope it would, but I also think about like how much as a world we've progressed, since my parents have been born, kind of deal.
Right.
This is amazing. It's amazing. Like, even since we were born, it's like this is always like, in the future, like this kind of thing. And it's like, well, the future's here, so this is crazy. But that's awesome. So hopefully
and there's also features. There's animated features and live action features, and the thing that Rick Rothschild and I are working on is new immersive technology for people to experience things that are both on a site and away from a site to co-experience something that is mind-boggling. And so we're trying to do breakthrough in an immersive means for themed entertainment. But that's just one part of many things that I'm pursuing, including long-form storytelling in features. There's things I've been tending to for years. But I learned to be patient when I opened the show Animation Magic on the two of their biggest cruise ships just before the most recent ones hit the sea. That was where 700 people at a time could do freehand drawings, and then we would map them into classic Disney films and have them dancing with the genie and Aladdin and stuff. But it's whatever you drew a few minutes ago is now dancing with him. I had originally tried to get that going outside of Disney as a Secret Life of Graffiti project, and put a lot of work into that, and had it almost happen with HBO, almost happened with MTV, almost happened with the blue collar comedy guys, almost happened with Chris Hedges, I think. But there's a bunch of times, and Alan Bloomquist and Glenn Lucas, who was on King of the Hill, one of the producers and stuff. It almost happened so many times, but after a decade goes by, my friends are going, "What are you still working on that for?" I think it's gone. And I think it was like 12 or 13 years in, it finally suddenly found a home where I got the call. We're building the ship. We're cutting steel. We have a place where magic has to happen. We don't know what the show is for that. It's like because of the rush. Normally, we would prepare all of that. Now we know what the room looks like. We know what the ambience is. But so I came in with, what do you think if a drawing comes alive a moment after you make it? And I showed them footage. I didn't tell them it was a decade old, but it was footage. And then suddenly it has a home. So now it's, every day on those two ships, 700 people at a time, multiple times a day, have their drawing come alive, and it's magical. But it was a long time to get there, and then it just suddenly was so. I would
love to do that. I'm just saying, like, I've never been on a cruise, but now I'm like, I want to go on a cruise just so I can do this.
Well, and I hope they eventually migrate it out into settings beyond the ships as well. It'd be fun.
So you had a lot of, obviously you kind of transitioned to a lot of theme park stuff. And the one that of course caught my eye was the Indiana Jones Stunt Spectacular, which was always a favorite of mine. How did that come about?
That was one where this happened a few times, where it was a sudden emergency call and they would ask me to do buzzer beater things. And so the dominoes that fell for that is I had Katzenberg call me, and they had seen me do the Robin Williams Back to Neverland thing. So that was like the first domino, was like, we have a show that we think is going to die. What would you do? And it's like, oh, we do a whole different thing. It's like, okay, do it. And then it worked. So they're like, okay, so the buzzer beater guy is like, let's go to him when we have problems. So they called me actually while I was working on Back to Neverland. Jeffrey called me and said, hey, we shot this thing with Lucas. We effing hate it. But he said the full word. And we don't know why. I'm going to send you the VHS. So I sent me a tape. Call me back. So I saw it and said, well, I think these are the problems and here's what I would do. Great. Write it later this week and go shoot it Friday. Bye. So I had rewritten the structure. I had invited Anthony Daniels to fly over from England and join in. And it was a whole thing. And I had to quickly, in 1 week, get it all accomplished and shoot it. So then I posted it up at the ranch with George, and Linda Ronstadt was there at the time helping me pick good shirts for George, because he would try to pick something that wasn't working and she would come in with something nice. So I got to post it there on the Editroid, which was like the first nonlinear system, one of the first. And so George had gotten used to me, and I had apologized when I walked in and said, I feel weird directing a director that I have so much respect for, and I've been so in awe of your work and on the big screen. And now I feel very pretentious to come in and assume to direct you. And he said, no, that's good. He said, last time as a committee came up, but there was no director. He said, I'm glad to have a director here now. So what do you got? And he said, I agreed to be in this, not to make it. So like, what do you want me to do? I'm your actor. So we went through that. And so then we went to the opening of the park, and that film with him and Anthony Daniels in it was one of the things that opened. But the thing that glaringly didn't open at Disney MGM Studios, the opening of the park, was the big stunt theater. They didn't sort of make a to-do and bring the crowds in and all of that. And George didn't feel like it was ready yet. And so I was just at the opening day party, the opening night party of the studio, and I see hands gesturing me over, and it's Eisner, Katzenberg, and Lucas. And so I go, and George goes, I want you to fix the stunt theater. And I said, well, I've never done giant amphitheater things with live actors, stunt actors. And he goes, it needs showmanship and storytelling, and you know how to do that. Go fix it. So that was my task. So, and then at the same time, they told me, Peter Schneider got together with me later that same night and said, okay, I know you got a full plate because George just told you to go fix the stunt theater. But now we have another show that is hurtling towards an opening day, and it's also in trouble. It's called Cranium Command. We're firing everybody. We're unplugging the whole story. We need you to look at it and figure what that should be. So I do a whole revamp of what that would be and started it. So I had to actually work Stunt Theater and Cranium Command at the same time. So I had to bring anybody who was going to work on Cranium Command to the Florida park with me and live there while I worked in Stunt Theater, because I had to be able to just run back and forth to my crew on one show and then back with the stunt people in the other show, right? Well, where I put them was in the Goldfish Bowl at Back to Neverland. So when you leave the Back to Neverland show with Robin and Walter, you go to that first place, and Walter's like, "This is the story department," or they blah 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 blah, and Robin goes, "Oh," you know, that spot was my storyboard team working for Crane and Command. So the public totally saw us create Crane and Command storyboards and plan the whole thing right in front of them in that space at the Back to Neverland theater space. So I was jumping between there and the stunt theater, and Glenn Randall, the amazing stunt coordinator for Indiana Jones, he was there, and he was working as director on the Indiana Jones Stunt Spectacular, and they had first said that they were going to fire him and have me replace him, and I said, "You're insane. This guy's a genius. I don't know how to do." He went out and arranged how to Indy, and in fact personally did the stunt where he drags under the truck and with the whip. You need this guy. I need this guy. So I said, I will go as a support for him and try to clear the pipes. And so I did do that. But it took him a while to trust me. And it's funny, when I first showed up, he had this sort of prove it attitude. It's like, oh boy, this young punk coming in to tell me what to do. Right? So I just said, I'm here to support, clear the pipes, try to clear a way for you to get something done that we can get approved by George. So he's like, come with me, takes me to the roof and goes, okay, these are descender cables. You attach them to your back and you jump off the roof. And the idea is that only the wind resistance on the little fan is what keeps you from smashing into the ground, right? Nothing else, just the wind resistance on the fan. Okay, now here's the one that I built. And it's kind of rusty, and he drew me a diagram. Here's the cone shape on this one. So the cable is wrapped around, and that's one you could use. Here's another one that was engineered by a bunch of people who say they know what they're doing from like the Disney Inner Sanctum. And they're telling me this is the one that's safe and that I should use this one. Which one do you trust to jump off this roof with? And I said, well, I think this really highly engineered one, the shape of it looks like it wouldn't offer much wind resistance, and it would probably let me drop faster and faster, and I would hit the ground really hard. And this other semi-rusty one has a sudden change in the cone shape where the cable's wrapped around, and it looks like that would change the speed of the fan really quick and probably give more wind resistance and slow me just before I hit the ground. He went, you are right. That is the correct answer. And so he trusted me. And so that was one of my big things, was to go with him against the big committee who had decided that they knew better and they knew how to design things for him. And it was safety was a concern. And I know everybody was thinking safety was the concern, but I actually, did the argument in front of Eisner, where I had like another powerful guy who walked in and said, by the way, I'm going to be speaking against you today with Eisner. And I went, I'm going to be speaking against you. That's how it goes. So we both spoke our piece. We both took out sandbags to the jump site. And I brought my home video camera just to drive them crazy. It's like, I'm filming this too. And dropped both bags. And sure enough, the one from the really engineered one smashed into the ground, and the one from his cowboy unsafe one dropped really fast at the beginning and then hit the ground like a feather at the end. So it looked more realistic and offered a safer landing. So Eisner said, okay, I buy in. You're going to have to change the engineering for this. And then we set about rewriting the story. So I huddled with them, and some of it, I'll just give you one tangible example. There was people that had been cast in a comedic role, and they were going to be doing like a dynamite thing as a truck went rolling around, they would do dynamite and make the truck tip over. But it was comedic because they were going to tell you ahead of time, which they did. That's the version that Lucas saw and did not approve. They would explain to you, hey, we have this fake truck. So when it goes around the corner, it's actually not the real truck continuing, it's the fake one. And then when it comes around here, I hit the thing and it looks like it explodes. Isn't that fun? And then they would do like let's all watch the fake thing. So I just said, well, I think you should do the opposite. I think you should act like it's real. And I think you should have the person, instead of being comedic, say, okay, now be really careful. Because when you come around here, I'm going to hit that dynamite, but I need you to be far enough past it where it doesn't hit you. So make sure you always keep this speed up, because if you slow down, you're going to hit the explosion. Okay, you understand? Like, be really, and then have people do it and have them, when it happens, it knocks over, and have them panic and rush toward the truck. Like, this is deep shit. And then you realize, and then you reveal, by the way, that the driver like stands up behind and goes, by the way, we pulled a trick on you. And then have everybody relieved. So they were like, great. So it was a whole bunch of stuff like that, where it's like, how does the story unfold? How does it involve the audience more deeply in what's going on? But then the comedy actor was like, and there were multiple shifts of them, like, well, I was hired to do comedy, and now I'm just doing straight drama. It's like, this is really interesting. But then I just came and reviewed it, and thumbs up. And we also rehearsed in one of the walk around spaces where the audience would look down into sound stages where things were being shot. So we were storyboarding Crane Command at the same time in front of the public at the Back to Neverland thing. And we were rehearsing the new version for the Indiana Jones Stunt Spectacular in front of the audience, taking a tour in another part of the park. Oh, nice.
So I have you to blame, because I remember those moments of, wait, did something bad happen?
Yes,
and I think that's why the show is so memorable. And I have to admit, Jerry, you lost me for a minute, because I was just trying to imagine what it'd be like to have Eisner, Katzenberg, and Lucas beckoning you over. I can't fathom what that would be like.
Well, at the time I had worked with all of them individually, and so it had become more of a normal thing. But looking back on it, it's pretty freaky.
If there's one lesson to be learned from this whole thing, it's why the beep doesn't Disney just call you first instead of screwing the shit up and then calling you? Like, seriously, every story, it's like, yeah, they screwed this up, they called me in. They screwed this up, they called me in. After all these screw ups, why don't they just call you first and avoid all that wasted time?
It's that's I've often thought about that. But the danger when you start at square one on a show is people do tend to fiddle, and everybody want their fingerprints on it. And sort of it's the difference between collaborative filmmaking, which is great, and consensus filmmaking, which to me is death. It's like turns everything into soup. If consensus, like show of hands, everyone has to agree, I think you're not making much of a statement. If it's collaborative, where you listen to everybody, but like one person takes authorship of, here's my style that I'm putting on top of all this advice, and I'm grabbing a little piece of that, but I'm putting it in this style bucket. It has a flavor instead of being just like gray soup. So so when you start, even with best intentions, with the long haul, with a committee all with you the whole time, it's hard to keep it in that collaborative and not consensus bucket. So even though it's a intimidating thing to come in and do fixes for things that have problems, the blessing curse is, and it was that way on Crane Command. The blessing curse. The curse was a good deal of the schedule was gone, and a good deal of the resources were gone. But the blessing was people had already seen what happened when you get too many cooks in the kitchen, and then there's nobody really making final decisions, and there's a train wreck. So instead, they would go, "What do you want to do?" And for that one, I remember having a conference call with Eisner Katzenberg, Marty Sklar, Tom Fitzgerald, Roy Disney. There were a few people, and I just went through, here's what I think's wrong, here's what I do instead, and they're like, go. And there was really good support from the studio, from all the different, needed departments to come in and just race for the finish line now. And they didn't do a bunch of, let me look at your notes, and there's a committee vote, and they have a bunch of things to address now and to change and whatever. It just became, have ideas and make them so. And we were coming up with things on the set during that, where we just, we'd figure out even an approach to do something technically, just with a home video camera and a bucket of water and something, model thing we would build on the side and shoot it and show it to cinematographer. He's like, great, build it big, let's do it. And so we could just run for the finish line shorter time, shorter budget, but real creative momentum without interruption. So that's the blessing.
Now, Disney World, I haven't been to either Disney World or Disneyland. I don't think I'm ever going to make it. But anyways, World is bigger than land, correct?
Yes.
And so not everything at World is at land, but in those rare cases they are. If you Imagineer something over at Disneyland, do you also have to go set it up at Disney World, or are they separate? Or
it's very separate, and which I didn't realize before I just started jumping into the Imagineering zone. Even as a total fan growing up, I still imagined that it was all sort of one thing, and that it would just all the parks were one thing. But they're separately. They have people leading separate parks, and they may or may not want a particular ride. So in Imagineering, you could come up with something, and one of the parks would want it, another park wouldn't, for whatever reason.
And they have taken
real quick.
Oh, yeah.
I want to point this out just because this is awesome. Someone was just YouTubing stuff about Brave Little Toaster, and this show popped up. So they just wanted to let you know that they love your film. So how random is that? You just happen to be YouTubing about Brave Little Toaster right now.
Thank you, Pinata Time, Pinata Time.
Pinata, yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. And that's my acrylic one sheet that I did for Toaster back in '87, or it was we were doing an early screening, and I put that in the Groundlings Improv Theater lobby to try to attract people to the Wadsworth Theater, where we were doing a festival screening. And I've never printed that. That's what wound up on the Disney home video box was a very pastel kitty looking thing. This is actually what I intended.
Nice.
So,
let's talk.
Do you know where your appliances are?
Talk about Toaster for a minute. I mean, this person's watching now, so I mean, we didn't really touch on Toaster that much, but yeah, like that's awesome that just happened. So can you talk a little bit about Toaster?
It's the most creative freedom I've ever had. It came after a bunch of pent up energy going towards things. Brad Bird and I had just spent just close to 5 years trying to get Will Eisner's The Spirit off the ground as an animated feature. And we had a script that people really loved, but they were thrown by the fact that it was animated. And they would say, well, we love this script. We're like, why are you making animation? Because animation is for kids. And we're like, no, it's not. It's just, if you make kid stuff, it's for kids. If you make just a movie, it's for everybody. And the fact that you love the script should tell you something. We're going to keep that vibe on the screen. And then we try to talk to them about, in the past, things that were made by the most famous studio in the world. Like, they never approached it as kiddie. They approached it as filmmaking. So, but anyway, we couldn't quite get it going off the ground. And Gary Kurtz, who was a wonderful supporter of it, he was our angel investor and paid for Brad and I for several years. He was going through financial hardships too. And so I segued out of that and just said, man, Gary and Brad, if we find a way to make this happen, I'm right back. But you could do with one less check to write every week. And so I'm going to go sort of try some other things. As soon as I was available and it got out, I was living up north in San Anselmo, San Rafael, and which is where Gary Kurtz's company was. But as soon as word got out, LA calls started coming in. And one of the first ones was from Tom Wilhite. And he said, I need you to fly down. I want to talk to you. There's a project. And so I flew down, and he met with me and said, it's a novella called The Brave Little Toaster. It started to happen at the studio. John Lasseter liked it, and they thought it was going to happen there. Everybody kept telling all of us, it's a nice idea for a short. It shouldn't be a feature. What are you guys doing? And he said, but whatever, John's gone now. And I'm now taking this property outside of Disney to do it independently. And I need somebody to take this novella and for the first time go beyond a short and really make it into a feature story, and to sort of develop it and then to write it and to direct it. Now I can offer you that, but I can't offer you much money. So, our entire budget for the 90 minutes, all said and done, was $2.25 million for the whole thing. Now, at the time, perspective, Care Bears was like 6 or 7. Bluth was doing 12-ish for his films. Disney was mid-20s. And so we were absolutely the cheapest thing out there. But I was able to go in and he also respected that it was clean slate. John Lasseter and I had gone to school together. We both were filmmakers in our own right and wanted to so he didn't blur the lines. He put up a firewall, just said, now it's yours, clean slate, whatever you want to do. I worked with Joe Ranft and Brian McEntee, who had started on the original development team too. I was delighted to continue working with them, but suddenly went through new things. Like I went in and looked at Brian's amazing artwork and saw this junkyard, the way he had drawn stacks of cars, and it was in the middle of the movie as one of the things they go past. And I went, oh my God, this belongs at the end of the movie. This is the graveyard. This should be the finale scene where they're going to die here unless, that's the end. And so let's shove that down there. And then there was an owner who had abandoned them. So I said, well, how about if they had bonded with a kid who played with the appliances and did pretend and stuff? And so that way the owner, the master, as they saw it, is blameless because it's just the kid. Like he didn't sell the house. And so it's like for the first time introducing the kid and then saying, well, and to have the irony of him feeling nostalgic about it and trying to come back to retrieve them. Like none of that was in the original story or the one that had started to be developed at the studio. So it was like new emotional stuff. And then the characters were thought of as a team. And it was the sweetest thing. I had somebody get in touch very recently and said, I went back to read the novella. And usually what happens is when you go read a book about a movie, you get more character depth. And the opposite happened. I read the book and got very little character depth, and you had much more of it in the movie. Well, I sat with Joe Ranft and with Brian McEntee at the beginning and hammered out this new story shape. One of them was figure out who the characters are individually. So for the first time, we went the toaster is warm, and other characters see themselves reflected in its chrome, so they feel kind of all feel comfortable. And like a male character would think of it as male, and a female would see the reflection, think of it as female. A flower would see itself reflected and think of it as another flower. So it becomes the center leader because of that, everybody being reflected in it and having an inherent warmth and a feeling of duty, of wanting to do a job well. And then, the lamp thinking it's bright, but being a little dim. And I just went, oh my God, the blanket, the blankie, everybody knows security blanket. Well, without the kid, let's make it an insecurity blanket. So everything was about it is insecurity until it dreams of getting back with the kid, which was not in the original story. There was no kid in either the book or the story being developed at the studio. And then having the kid grown up when they're reunited, like he's now getting ready to go to college, that shows you how much time has passed. There also was there was no junkyard at the end, and there was no moment where it's like there is the one that they've loved and traveled the whole place to be with is now going to die unless they save it. And the toaster itself has a brave moment, earning the title Brave Little Toaster, to throw itself into gear to get mashed and save it. Like none of that was in the original story. So going with index cards and like creating all of the new who the characters are and where the story goes as a new thing, then it was just hitting the ground running with writing a few pages and handing them out. And I also continued to storyboard it in addition to writing and directing, where it was Daryl Rooney and Alex Mann and Joe Ranft and me storyboarded everything. So it would start with me closing the door and writing things and then getting enough pages to hand to all four of us. And then we would word stuff and I'd go over it, everything. And I was trying to emphasize with all of them, the three of them and me, that I wanted to approach this really as a filmmaker in sort of the Spielberg sense, the Lucas sense, where you're not doing what normally would happen in a big studio, where you just storyboards of bits of business characters might do. And later a layout department goes, well, I might pick this camera angle for that. And then later the director reviews it and goes, yeah, I like your camera angle, but I might change X. And it's like months of stuff. No, the moment we draw it, we have to think about what is the filmmaking of this? How does that unfold moment by moment? And just one tiny example, this is the most tiny but clear to understand, is I liked tease and reveal stuff. And I would do, for instance, there's a scene where Almost St. Peter's rescues them out of the sinking swamp, the quicksand. Now, you don't know that at the time. You just see them sinking and the radio's antenna is the last thing there. But you see this big MIDI hand sort of grab. And you're like, oh, who was that? And then you see, and you're not sure what it is, but it's the bed of a truck, but shot in a way so you don't reveal the truck. and you hear them clang. You see them throwing and clang, and then you get just cut to pattern on the screen, and it actually is a close up to fill the entire frame in sort of a zoom lens sort of shot, not a wide angle, but of just tread of a giant tire. And you just see that and you're like, I don't even know what that is. It's a bunch of zigzags. And then you see a guy climbing it and you're like, oh my God, this guy is climbing it. And then you cut wide and reveal for the first time, it's a big tire truck. And he had to climb up the tire to even get to the cab. And so I mean, that's a simple example, but I like, that's a real tease. I could have just cut to a truck, no response. The first time I saw it in a theater, there was such a huge audience reaction. I didn't anticipate that would happen at all. I wanted to be sneaky and surprise them, but I didn't know that the whole audience in the theater would suddenly let out a burst when they saw the truck. Because it's like tease, it's like a hand, and it throws them through them somewhere. I don't know where. I see a pattern. I don't know what it is. He's crawling up it. Oh, it's a tire on a big truck, and big audience reaction. Well, that stuff that's committing moment by moment to the cinema. And it's not just generally doing story events and then deciding later how you would do it. And we were on such a sort of Indiana Jones, going back to that. It's like being pursued by the big ball, because there was no time to rewrite something or to do another version or put together the story reel and anything but the tiniest tweaks I did in the editing room. You couldn't do draft after draft after draft. You just had to do the movie straight ahead. So it was getting everybody in that mindset and then just pushing straight ahead. And I recall one thing in particular. Joe and I used to, while we were working on it in McCadden Place in Hollywood, where, by the way, truth, we had rats vying for the cream cheese on the table in the morning, not lying. And so people would tend to bring their own stuff in and ignore what was on the catering table because a rat. But we were there doing the storyboards, and Tom would invariably bring people by for a pitch to try to raise a little bit more money. So we'd go from making the film to suddenly presenting what we had to people that would come in to pitch. So Joe Rampton and I would do tag team pitching, which we were used to. So we'd go, do the different voices, and I would do a board, and then I would slide mine out of the way, and Joe would come in and he'd pitch a board and slide it out of the way, etc. So we'd go back and forth. And for the air conditioner, we just, for the longest time, we had gotten everybody else established for who they were. And for the air conditioner, we didn't really have the inner core. It was just an angry guy. So we'd just do a gruff voice. And we never quite felt comfortable with that. And I just certainly, as writer-director, was not yet happy with it. So we started kind of doing the Nicholson thing a little bit, just as a joke with each other during a pitch, saying, you guys must be, you got to combine 5 watts, So then we started to laugh with it ourselves and with each other. So I just went, oh my God, it's Nicholson, because he's cool, like an air conditioner. Who's more cool? Mm-hmm. And then he's above everyone else, literally, because he's mounted on the wall, which makes him kind of lofty but separated. So I just went, oh my God, I finally have a take on it. And so I went and closed the door and locked it and wrote that entire scene from the stairs and the picture breaking all the way to the exploding air conditioner in just one sitting of just write that scene entirely, because it had finally gelled as that character. So unlocking the character was key. And then getting the right voices. And oh my God, Deanna Oliver and Tim Stack and John Lovitz and just on and on. Thurl Ravenscroft, Timmy Day. It was just a dream. And that was a real problem when we first started working with voices. The first voice people we got in, and it was a respectable list, but everybody would try to make it sound really odd. I think they felt like they were obliged to make it sound, oh, I am a cartoon. And I'd be like,
yeah.
I wrote this morning, and I know in my head it was not awful, but now that I'm hearing it, it's awful. So Joe said, hey, I'm taking some classes down at the Groundlings Improv Theater. There's cool people down there. You want to go see? So I was like, yeah, let's go. So we went down there, and it was so fun to see them at work, because they would do the opposite. They, instead of taking a character and trying to make it seem crazy, they would do the opposite. Somebody in the audience would go, well, you're a radish. And somebody else will go, yeah, you're a piece of celery. And then they're like, okay, you're at a bus stop, fall in love. And so then they would have to make it seem believable. It's like, it's already crazy. Their job wasn't to make it crazy. It's like, it is crazy. How do you convince me that a stalk of celery and a radish could fall in love? So
at
then
a bus stop, yeah.
They had to look for then they had to look for what's believable about the crazy situation. So I went, okay, those are the kind of people I need thinking about this. So yeah, when they came in, oh man, all of them just would nail it because they were looking for the relatability. They went, oh, it's already novel. I have to create the relatability and the believability in the center of that. So they were great collaborators.
Nice. So they have a question and also a comment. So actually 2 comments. But the first, the question is that saying that you probably have no control over this part of it, but is there a reason why there's no Blu-ray release of The Brave Little Toaster? And is it hard to find like a good master of the film?
I agree, and I mourn that along with you. It was divided in so many strange ways, having been the only way we could get it done was as an independent film with a tiny budget. And, that group of 4 producers had the theatrical rights, but Disney had the home video rights and the channel rights, but they didn't have any merchandising rights. And so it was split in kind of an odd way. And then when I actually took it to Sundance Film Festival, before it was anywhere, just had been at a couple of festivals, the judges told me in private and told our producer in private that I had a couple of them come up and say, we feel like you have the best feature here this year, but we can't let a cartoon win the award as we're starting the Sundance Film Festival or people won't take it seriously. So just so secretly we think you have the best film, but we're going to give the award to somebody else. So that was going on, and Scurus Films stepped up to do an art house release. So I was like, oh my God, thank goodness. And they got it. They went, this is like a college and young adult film. This isn't a kid's film. Mm-hmm. And so we're not going to worry about matinees or anything. We're just going to do our art houses. And I said, great, thank you. And then Disney Channel moved the airing up, and they heard about it. They knew about it. They found out I was taking it to Sundance. And then they moved up the cable screening on Disney Channel and killed the theatrical release. So I actually, and my lawyer, who I still have today, Peter Nichols, wonderful guy. He's so connected with animation industry, but he approached Rebecca and me at the festival and said, hey, I'm just starting out as a lawyer and I loved your film. Do you need a lawyer? And I went, yes. Yes, I do. I have this weird thing going on where it's like the channel is moving up to totally kill the theatrical, but the theatrical is going to happen and it would make it more valuable for everybody. And we worked so hard on this film. She goes, well, I'll go check it out. And he came back and he said, I can't figure it out. It's like, by purposely moving the date up and making sure the theatrical does not happen, it will be a less valuable product for Disney, but they won't stop. And Scurus can't continue to release it if it's already on the channel. So I'm sorry. And then, I figured out, I talked to Jeffrey during that time too, Katzenberg, and he's like, hey, we don't want to stand in your way, kid. And I said, but you are. Hey, good luck, So, but it was such a smart chess move on his part and the studio's part, because on my website I have the reviews we were getting just from it screening in a festival before it showed anywhere, and they were saying sharper and wittier than anything coming out of Disney, and finally proves they can make them like they used to. It was the most series of rave reviews I've ever gotten, except for one from Carl Sagan for Crane and Command, which was cool. But all these reviews, if they hadn't made that chess move, there would be rave reviews for competition. Once they swallowed it up and called it a Disney discovery, they were all glowing Disney reviews.
Right, that's true, yeah.
So, it was a smart chess move. But as a result, and then eventually the Yair Landau stepped up and really wanted to join forces with me and ignore the 2 sequels that happened. I must admit, I've never watched them. It's kind of just a soul thing. It's like I had nothing to do with them, and they may or may not be fine, but I just made the original, and that's the one that's dear to my heart. So I've never seen the sequels, but Yair had stepped up and said, in my mind, if there's going to be a sequel, it's, just as a producer who wants to make money, I would go like, okay, that one stood the test of time and had more of a following. The other two didn't have as much of a following. So I would go to the guy who worked on the first one, who directed it and wrote. And by the way, in the writing of it, they first had me listed as writer director. I told them, and as I would hand out segments to Joe Ramp to do, I thought he contributed enough to absolutely be included as a writer. So I insisted that he be called co-writer. So that had happened because I requested it. But he just said I would go back to the source of the first one and do a proper sequel as you would have made it. And you can just pretend the other two didn't happen, and what would you do? So that had happened. And then there was a bidding war that happened where at the time the rights went away from the original 4 producers who I thought held them. It went to a third-party arbitrator because bankruptcies had happened, and we were told that it didn't belong to any of them in the way that they thought, and there were sort of courts involved, and so it went to a third-party arbitrator, and Yair was like, great, we'll just now buy it clean, and it's kind of like shaking the Etch-a-Sketch again, like you did when you took over the film. So we'll do it again and just start now where I just buy it from the third-party arbitrator. But he was outbid. There was a mystery bidder that would multiply anything he did by 2. So he finally said, whatever I put down times 2, I can't keep going. So he had to eventually drop it, and it was purchased by someone else. So it's just gone a lot of different directions, and it's still completely dear to my heart. And I've got a story in my head for what I would do next. And but like I told you, that project that wound up on the 2 Disney ships was like 14 years before that happened. So I never consider something out of my sort of creative play zone.
Right.
So I'm patient, but I sympathize. I wish there was clear sort of rights control and a release of Blu-ray and the restoration of the original film and all that good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it would be good. Like even if it could get like a Criterion release or something at some point where they like put all the extras in there. So they're also saying that the story is crazy. That they wish that everything could be figured out. They wanted to point out how amazing the animation is, and it's they love the style, and they're asking for a better look of that toaster poster. I don't know if it's easy to take off the wall, but they're asking for a better look. Toaster poster.
Oh, it's big.
Oh my God! Yeah, it's way bigger.
I thought it was like an 8.5 by 11 behind him. I didn't realize how close that back wall was.
Wow!
Don't drop it.
Wow!
Wow, that's
very cool.
That's sharp.
Yeah, it's way bigger than we thought it was. That's awesome.
Magic of perspective.
That's awesome.
That's great.
And because you don't have the rights, you can't release that. Like you wouldn't be able to release that as a poster.
Well, not for profit, but
yeah, it's true.
as a work of art. So it says it's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your appliances are?
Yeah,
that's awesome. And unfortunately,
our family has a show that's going to be coming to Creative Talent Network, their gallery space next April, and I am thinking for the first time to actually have this scanned properly, and it's just it's a rough acrylic I did for the Groundlings lobby. It's not a finished beautiful thing, but
it
looks finished to us.
Yeah, that's it's a finished beautiful thing in our eyes. Yeah.
While Jerry hangs that back up, I will say that he's mentioned Daryl Rooney once from TRON, and I think actually maybe Fox and the Hound or whatever, but he also worked on the
storyboarded on Brave Little Toaster.
Yeah, so he's going to be on in October, I think the 2nd. You have to go to the website and check it out, but we will have Daryl Rooney on not next month, but I believe it's October, and he can maybe talk a little bit about his work on
and he it was critical. He was one of the 4 of us storyboarded the whole film, and Daryl was one of those guys.
That's awesome.
And he had worked with Brad Bird and I on the Spirit thing. That was such a passion project for all of us. John Musker did animation, and Daryl had done layouts for us that were just beautiful. And Harry Sabin worked on it, and Glenn Keane worked on it. Everybody was moonlighting. I don't think the studio was aware of any of that, but we were about, and I did the storyboards for Spirit, and Brad and I were doing storyboards for that when Gary hired us. But before we talked, Gary Kurtz convinced him to back it. What we had to do was make a trailer of coming attractions for the Spirit. We didn't have the money to take it to color, but it's all just pencil test. And I think it's a shaky version from VHS is posted on YouTube, I think, by somebody. But I animated on it, and Daryl Van Sitters animated on it, and Musker, and a bunch of us. And I know I'm leaving some people out, but it's I really loved going in and storyboarding those characters, but anyway, Daryl was one of the people that came in and put in night work in addition to doing work at the studio, including TRON, to do extra work for us to try to get the Spirit off the ground. So Daryl was one of the people that helped do the show and tell. We showed it to Gary Kurtz, and he got it totally. He had just done American Graffiti, Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back. He saw our thing and went, I get it. This is a movie that belongs in the canon of films that I do. And he 100% got it. And so he knew this is going to be a big film that and we believed animation could break $100 million at the box office. At the time in the 70s, you talked to, and as we're getting into 80, 81, 82, you talk to people about that. They thought you were nuts, but Gary believed it. And, so our little team that put together the trailer of coming attractions at the time, and Daryl being one of them that helped with that, he could just envision it.
It's amazing how you all got kind of started out. And like I say, you were working with Tim Burton, before the whole thing, and Daryl was doing his thing. And then you all came together on TRON, and then you all just, remained friends. And, hey, I'm doing a project. You want to help out? Hey, I'm doing a project. You want? And you just kind of, that whole thing stayed together,
right.
That lasted forever.
Yeah. And in fact, I was comparing notes that with, on TRON to Toaster, I had two producers, Will Hite and Kushner, both were on TRON and Toaster, and Daryl Rooney was on both, and John Norton was briefly on did a little bit of stuff on Toaster, but he did the grid bugs on TRON. Yeah. And so there were a number of crossover people. And John Shealy, who was technical supervisor on TRON, also went out to pave the way for us to do camera work at Cuckoo's Nest, which, by the way, was another thing where they did the ink and paint stacks of those cells for the downshooter camera on TRON. They were the studio. We went to them in Taiwan and lived with them for 6 months in making Toaster. So they were another TRON connection.
Wow.
So there were a lot of things where we would just discover each other and our set of talents and decide, hey, let's get together again.
It's amazing.
I'm so glad that Pinata Time just happened to be
for real.
Like seriously, like that's that's just like what this podcast is about. But the fact that
it looks like I don't know if I'm but their icon is like two animated characters or two like illustrated characters. I'm wondering if they do some animation themselves. So I'm gonna have to check out your channel after we're done with this, and I'm just curious of what you do. But we are a little over 2 hours.
A little over, but hey,
but it's the thing.
It's
been an hour and a half.
Great show,
But it's but definitely thank you very much for talking with us and some amazing stories. And RW, you want to wrap things up?
Let me just scratch the surface.
Yep.
Totally. That's the thing. That's why it needs to be a documentary. Right. And Pinata Time does do some animation, so I will be checking that out for sure.
Cool. I do.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, go do the word. You always do the word.
So is there anywhere? Is there anywhere that your fans can go to find out? I mean, you have your website, but do you have social media and stuff too, where people can just see what you're working on? Or
a lot of the stuff I'm working on is proprietary until it's ready to announce. I'm co-authoring a book that is going to be announced pretty soon, and Rick and I are working to unlock new ways for immersive camaraderie that'll connect people at themed sites and people outside of themed sites. And we're working on a couple of features that are dear to my heart that I'm trying to get off the ground. So I would just say, Facebook, LinkedIn has on my CV is also my personal email listed on the CV if people want to write to me personally. And I do. And sorry to people, I think Brian Martin, I've been delayed in getting back to some of his messages recently, but when people do message me in either LinkedIn or FaceTime, I try to get back to people. And also, by the way, at my website, jerryrees.com, it's stopped at like 16 theme park attractions. I now have 22. I just haven't updated recently.
There's so many, you don't have the time. Yeah.
So I really do need to update it, but still quite a few people have gotten through to me just by going there and then writing to me from my website. So, and I try to answer them, and I have a stack of things, some of them several years old, but I have gotten back to as many people as I can. I've been thinking of doing this, and maybe people can let me know what they think. Instead of sitting and writing, and the reason it takes me so long is because I hate to just write some little, hey, thanks for your note. And
right, yeah.
If somebody writes to me like, what classes do you think I should take if I'm going to get into this field? And I'm about to go to college and whatever. I often sit down and take like 4 hours on a Sunday and write something thoughtful back to that person. And, you can only do so much and you run out of hours, and especially when you're working on your own stuff through the day and night. But I get it done as I can. But I've been thinking that I could get through more volume of it if I take their note and maybe not read the name if they don't want me to, but say a person got in touch to ask this, and then just to post a video that on YouTube, just start answering your email channel. And
I can tell you, for as much as a note means to people, I'm sure that they would be fine with you mentioning their names, but that, like, as a fan of a lot of stuff in general, whenever anyone takes the time to interact, that's huge. Yeah. So even just writing the note is huge. But if you did that, I'm sure it would be a thrill to people.
I think I could get through much more of the stack if I just spoke the answer instead of trying to carefully craft over several hours what the answer would be.
Oh, totally.
So I think I could take care of much more of the volume of
totally. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, and some answers might, benefit other people. So like if someone's like, I'm going to college and I'm going to do this thing, what should I do? And you put that up, then the next person won't have to ask that question because the answer will already be there or whatever. So
right.
Yeah. Right. I'm amazed that you're still responding to me after 10 years of friendship.
Are you kidding? It's fun. You're a cool guy.
It's like,
you say after 10 years of friendship?
Again. It's RW again.
Well, have you guys have talked a lot in the past?
Well,
I don't even know the history.
Yeah, he came and met us at which anniversary was
30th. So 10 years ago, there was the 30th anniversary of TRON, and maybe a year before that, I was trying to track down as many people who made this TRON movie as possible. I'm trying to read this at the same time. Okay. So I'm like, hi, Jerry, are you the guy that worked on TRON? And he's like, yeah, who are you? How'd you get my number? I'm on the phone to, authorities right now. You get about 6 seconds before they're knocking on your door. And we kind of, I don't know if I called him or if I emailed him or whatever, but we became friends. And then he's like, hey, you're going to come to the 30th. And at that point, I didn't really have a way of getting there, but somehow it all worked out. And yeah, I was at the 30th in California, met him and Daryl Rooney and Kushner and Steve Lisberger, and I didn't get to meet Bruce there because he left, but I met him like a few months later or whatever. I got to meet Arnie Wong, and
so I've got pictures with you.
Yeah. So awesome. If you go to
and there was a whole after
Bill
party
Colley or Callie, Bill, who wrote the book.
Mm-hmm.
Callie, yes. Mm-hmm. So Bill Callie has a thing from script to screen or from something like that website, and it has all the, or you can just Google TRON 30th, and yeah, you'll find some pictures of me and Jerry and Bill Croyer there on the grid. But yeah, so for 10 years we've had a friendship, and we share the same birthday, November 15th, and
nice.
We had a lot of stuff in common. But yeah, I appreciate you being here. I didn't mean to cut you off, but yeah, so go follow Jerry at jerryrees.com, and if he puts up this YouTube channel,
and
go
Facebook
check out
and LinkedIn and
Wisdom.
Yeah,
and I'm trying to consider doing that later, probably in a couple months, to get videos of answers to questions people have written in.
I think it's a great idea. I think people would be thrilled. So that's great. But yeah, so do you have anything else, RW? Besides go check out Pinata Time?
Exactly. No, make sure you follow us, Pinata Time, because we do these every Sunday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 11 a.m. Pacific, and we always have great guests. I mean, you can follow me here, and at the bottom is all the links to my stuff. I appreciate you being here, Jerry. Robert, where do you want people to follow you? And again, thank you for being here as well.
Yep, setjetter.com, and thank you, Jerry, for sharing the magic and near the end, the not so magic of the business. But that's what that is also what happens with success. That it begins to divvy up the pie.
And let me just add as a note to that. Even though we went through all that hardship of the bumped theatrical screening and all that stuff, it's just been truly sweet for all of us who worked on the film to see that as kids who saw that, and parents who thought it was exclusively a kids' film. It showed it to them as they've grown up. And something I didn't anticipate happening is them rediscovering it in college and past college. And a lot of people have talked about rediscovering it and realizing, oh, this speaks to me at this age. But I watched it when I was a kid too. So the fact that there is nostalgia and a connection that people have found it somehow in their own way is just extraordinary. And so, it's not like I'm harboring bitterness toward the chess moves that were truly frustrating at the time. But I think, I'm not here to complain about that. I'm here to be thankful for the fans that eventually found it. So.
Yeah, and it's even going beyond that too. Like I was hanging out with my parents and my brother, or my sister and my niece and everything last night, and I was mentioning people that we had on the show and people that were coming on. I mentioned you, and they're like, "Oh, what's he from?" And I mentioned all these things that you did, like movies that I think are like legendary, obviously, like Fox and the Hound and stuff like that, Tron. And then my dad, who's born in 1939, which I met when I mentioned Brave Little Toaster, he almost dropped his fork. He's like, "What?" Yeah. So wow. I've talked to all these horror icons on my regular show and all these other things. He doesn't care anything about that. He's all about the Brave Little Toaster. So
cool.
Maybe he's watching. Who knows? What's
nice
up, Skip?
To hear.
But
he dropped his fork again.
Yeah. Anyways, that's about that, right, guys?
I think that is it, Jerry. Thank you again for being here. And
thanks, RW. Thanks, Robert. Thanks, Kevin.
In a couple of months, in like 2 months or whatever, we got Daryl Rooney. We'll talk about Toaster again. I guess.
Yes, definitely. And thanks, Pinata Time, for interacting with us.
Yes, that was perfect. That was like that
perfect timing. Yes,
that was insane. Yes. Yeah.
All right. Have a good day, everyone, and go watch Brave Little Toaster. Why don't you?
Yeah.
All right.
Or Tron.